Rabbanit Sarna and Rabbi David Wolkenfeld. Shalom and welcome to the Straw Hat. We are the official podcast of Anshe Shalom B'nai Israel Congregation, an Orthodox synagogue in the beautiful Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois. In this week's episode, we have a section on Parshat Vayigash with a fascinating 21st century interpretation put forward by Rabbi Yoel ben Nun, who we will be talking about as well, and his whole school of Tanakh interpretation. And then we will be talking a little bit about Tractate Niddah, which we are finishing up in the Daf Yomi cycle. And lastly, this episode rounds out with an interview with Anshe Shalom's very own Gabbai, Dr. Josh Ehrlich.
Parshat Vayigash contains a very dramatic scene where, after chapters of playing with his brothers, it seems, and hiding his identity, Yosef finally comes out and shares who he is and shares his identity with his brothers, who are shocked and surprised to discover that this Egyptian whom they were negotiating with and pleading with is none other than their brother Yosef.
And it's kind of amazing just that in my lifetime, a new pshat reading of that moment really has kind of transformed the way that people read the Torah, which is, until Rav Yoel ben Nun came along, and we'll introduce him and talk about him in a second, no one kind of entertained the idea that Yosef, or no one, I mean, I can't say no one for sure, there's been a lot of Jews who've read the Parsha over time, but no one in writing kind of entertained the idea that Yosef just assumed that he had been kicked out of his family and that they didn't want him back. They didn't call, they didn't write, and it's just like, it's one of those amazing things where you think, wow, like, this text, like, what more could possibly be said about it? And then someone comes along, you know, in the 21st century and says, you know, the way to read this is that Yosef assumed that they weren't interested.
So let's gather some of the evidence that Rav Yoel uses to promote this case. We'll say a little bit of Rav Yoel ben Nun as well, and also I think the movement that he is
champion.
Yeah, I think one of the founding members of, and still exemplary member of this new movement of Torah interpretation. So first of all, some evidence. Yosef is sent to his brothers by his father, right? Mm-hmm. His father sends him on this mission, and as soon as he gets there, the brothers grab him and throw him in a pit. So as far as Yosef knows, maybe this was part of the father's plan. After all, every other generation of his family, there has been a rejected child. And so Yosef assumes that it's him, after all, right?
And they're going in kind of the right direction, right? The same way that like Hagar and Ishmael kind of go to the desert, towards Egypt, whatever. Like he's kind of sent off in that direction as well.
Yeah. And so that's from Yosef's perspective why he thinks his father might have been in on the plan. And the other, I think, piece of evidence is that the moment when Yosef reveals himself, after lots and lots of back and forth, and Shimon is in prison, and then Binyamin's in prison, the whole back and forth, the piece of information that the brothers had not divulged yet in their dialogue with this Egyptian man is the fact that there was another brother who was lost, and that their father mourns him and doesn't realize, what had happened. It wasn't in the plan. And as soon as Yehuda mentions that fact, Yosef instantly says, I am Yosef, your brother, and he's my father. Right? So that also, I think, is a really powerful piece of evidence supporting
and
this
that
theory.
Possibly Yosef wasn't, meaning, like we usually read it, that Yosef was just planning, he was testing them, but that there was a test that they could pass. But with this read, it actually maybe wasn't a test that if he's assuming my father doesn't care and I'm not interested in telling them who I am unless I know that I haven't been kicked out, because, whatever, like he has a whole life there now. Why bother? Maybe he's just toying with them and it's actually not a test that they can pass unless Yaakov is on board, which Yosef isn't assuming is a remote possibility. Right,
so Yosef is doing that. He's not when he's testing them to see how much they care about Binyamin. Will they protect him the way they didn't protect him? He's not testing them according to this read. He's protecting Binyamin. He's like, me and Binyamin, we're the children of the rejected wife, and so we're the ones who. So he's trying to he's not. It's not about a test of the brothers. It's about protecting Binyamin and getting him to be with him. Like we're the rejected kids. Let's be together at least. And that's what his plan was. And then all of a sudden the mission changes once he gets that really, really crucial piece of information.
Yeah.
So I guess earlier understanding, Ramban famously says, no, it's about he's trying to make his dream a reality. So he has this vision of what's supposed to happen, and so he's trying to orchestrate things to make that happen. I think it sort of just begs the question of Why? Yeah, right. Exactly. So this is not the only way to read the story. I don't want to, and there are even, and there are students and colleagues of Rabbi Ben Nun who disagree and argue. But I think it's a wonderful example of, in recent memory, somebody looking at the same story that's been studied for thousands of years and offering a new interpretation that is quite compelling. And there really some years I've been very, very taken by this shot of Rabbi Ben Nun. The Rashbam, one of the great medieval Pashim, has this phrase where he talks about the Shatim Chadshim B'chol Yom, right? The daily discovery of new Pshatim, new plain sense readings of the Torah. And this is a great example. There's really been a flourishing of Pshatim in the last generation. It's been described as the new school of Pshat, right? In the Middle Ages, there was for several generations in northern France this flourishing of a Pshat type of, and
what are they fighting against? Meaning, so what Rashi does is, right, in day school they always teach, right, that Rashi is the Pshat, but really a huge portion of Rashi's work is taking midrashim from Midrash Rabbah and putting them into the text, and sometimes he'll say, why is this word here, or whatever. I mean, there's always a what's bothering Rashi.
Rashi also, and I want to say, I think Rashi says explicitly about himself, Lo bati el l'pshuto shel mikra. So he also saw himself as a Pashtan,
who then draws very heavily on the Masoret and on.
But he says the midrashim that he selects are those that are miyashevet divrei mikra. He says so. He only selects those midrashim that he thinks are consistent with his understanding of Pshuto, but it's a generation one. He's like Pshat 1.0.
And he's kind of a bridge between the Torah means what the Midrash says it means to, the Torah means what this Midrash says it means. Whereas Rashbam says, no, the Torah means what the Torah means. And he describes having a conversation with his grandfather, Rashi, where Rashi said, yes, if only I had time in my life to rewrite my whole commentary, I would do what you're doing and write it according to the new Pshatim, right? Which means, right, like Rashi is tapping into like old Pshatim maybe, or something like that.
Or I think if you embrace a Pshat method of understanding Psukim, a plain sense meaning that's not dependent on or based on older interpretations, the classic midrashim, etc., then of course they'll come up with new things, because it's not a fixed corpus of canonical material, that source material that you're pulling from, and the ones you think are best. It's actually, let me look at this with fresh eyes and see what makes the most sense to me. So there's that medieval school of Pshat, and they, the ones who were in Spain and who knew Arabic, they drew upon Semitic philology and grammar, like Ibn Ezra is one of them. And in northern France, they didn't know Arabic or grammar, but they sort of intuitively understood a lot about grammar. And they had and they also in northern France, they were talking about psukim with Christians, and so there was a real context of what does this verse really mean, okay? And so that maybe also fueled this medieval school of Pshat. But in the 20th century, you have the new school of Pshat is drawing on knowledge of Ugaritic and literary analysis and all sorts of other tools that they didn't have in the Middle Ages, but also with that same endeavor of like Pshuto Shemikra, like let's try to understand what the Torah means, distinct from how we live, like the normative meaning of Psukim, which is, for Orthodox Jews, determined once and forever by the classic Midrashim of Chazal, right? So, whatever the Torah says, "Lo tivashel gedi b'chelev imo," don't boil a kid in its mother's milk 3 times. That means definitively now and forever. That means you can't cook or eat or derive benefit from any dairy or meat that have been cooked together. That's the halakhic meaning. That's the normative meaning of those 3 psukim. But the pshat could be, I don't know, maybe we'll discover some Ugaritic text that sheds light on those verses, or maybe someone will discover some literary analysis of the structure of Sefer Shemot, where it'll make sense in a new way, in a new light, right? And that's part of what's so amazing about the Torah. Meaning, if the Torah were this kind of like fixed thing that all you had to do in order to understand it was learn the way it's always been understood, well then like reading it every year would be kind of boring. But the fact that the Torah every year could be totally understood afresh, and in every generation you can find new things that aren't just kind of, well, what's culturally exciting now, let me read that into the Torah, which is of course a very fun project that I love, but also literally like, what does the Torah mean? And that you can keep asking that question for thousands of years and coming up with new answers,
based on new tools or just new brains thinking about it in the world and in different kinds of communities, I think is really just astounding and exciting.
So let's say more about this new school of Pshat. Yoel Ben Nun is one of, I think, the founding members of this new school of Pshat. It was a group of, I think it grew really out of Yeshivat Har Etzion in the 70s, students of Rav Amital and of Lichtenstein who were, I just reading an article that Lichtenstein gave a speech when he was still at Stern College, kind of laying out a program for like 20th century Orthodox Bible scholarship in which he encouraged the use of literary analysis for Torah scholarship by Orthodox Jews. And then he moved to Israel and joined the leadership of Yeshivat Har Etzion. And then he attracted a group of students like Rav Yoel Ben Nun and like Rav Meidan. And then the establishment of Herzog College, which has a major Tanakh department and sponsors Yimei Iyun and Tanakh and publishes books in a Tanakh journal
called
Megadim, which is where this article, this thesis was originally published. And I think that's been a really important. And in America, people like Rav Karmi, I'd say, would be part of that group and others as well. So it's, I think, an exciting time for Orthodox Bible scholarship in this way.
Yeah, and look, in Israel, they're also beginning to ask questions that in America, the Orthodox community isn't, in terms of like integrating, because also, I think with Bar Ilan, you have an integration between this community of Bible scholars and the academy, that you have kind of a bridge that doesn't really exist in America. And so they're starting, like Rav Brandis and like that crew is starting to even ask questions about, and there's a book out, you read it, right? You gave a drasha about this, about kind of bridging Bible scholarship and this kind of way of reading the Torah. In many ways, we kind of lag behind Israel in this kind of scholarship, and we'll see what happens in America.
I think it comes in Israel. There's a lot of just from even just being in like the land where the Tanakh happened. I think that sort of helps, gives light to certain understandings, and I think raises the importance of, I think, certain narratives and stories, and so the geography, et cetera, that all, so you can sort of get that in a way that's much more immediate than is possible here. I think it also fuels it.
Right. Well, you can go to a place and you can understand, like, I don't know, like the fight between David and Goliath, like much better when you're literally standing there and being like, okay, so David was up there and Saul was up there and they were having this conversation over there and like the Philistines were over here, and then they like, whatever, like that just adds in a whole new dimension to your ability to understand Tanakh. So certainly like the return to Eretz Yisrael has been a big motivating force in this.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that actually, Ramban, when he finished his commentary on the Torah in Eretz Yisrael, he, after the disputation of Barcelona in 1263, had to flee for his life, and he ended up in Eretz Yisrael, where I think he rewrote a certain of his kinds, like, this actually doesn't make sense anymore. Like, now that I see where all these places are, this, and he made a few changes, I think. I don't remember what ones in particular, but sort of a known thing about the Ramban.
So anyway, something to carry with you as we read Parshat Vayigash this week. For the last, 68 days or so,
give or take,
I guess when you're listening to this podcast, it'll be 70. We've been learning Masachet Niddah in Daf Yomi, and you might have thought that given that Niddah is an area of halacha still observed today, that all of Masachet Niddah would be like very, very kind of practical. But in truth, we've kind of only gotten to the practical stuff in the last chapter of Masachet Niddah, relatively recently.
So there are two reasons for that. I think the first is that most of Masachet Niddah really fits in the context of Tumah V'Tahara, the Torah's vast system of purity regulations, which really are about access to the temple and access to temple foods, sacred foods, Truma, Kachim, and the like. And that's just not a part of Judaism that we practice right now. And so that's probably, like 2/3 at least of the Masechet is really, really mostly relevant for that reality, and so that takes off chapters and chapters from really practical considerations for the most part. And the other reason is that what we call Niddah is really maybe a misnomer.
Right. So the Torah lays out two different kinds of blood that women can give off that give them types of impurity. So one of those is Niddah, one of those is menstrual blood, and one of those is Ziva, and it's maybe some kind of like gonorrhea or something like that, like something that's considered kind of more disease-y than Niddah. And the rules about them are actually really different. Niddah is 7 days total. And at the end of those 7 days, you, there's not even mikvah in the Torah, but it's read in by the rabbis to be a Torah level requirement for Niddah. And
so 7 days from beginning to end. So she starts bleeding, counts 7 days, and she could bleed all 7 days. She could bleed 3 of those days, but after 7 days after she begins, she goes to the mikvah, and then it's done. That's the Niddah d'oraita. And then
there's Zava, which is this gonorrhea thing, and that involves seeing blood on a number of consecutive days. So she sees blood on 1 day or 2 days, she's called a little Zava, a Zava Ketana, minor Zava,
lesser Zava.
Lesser Zava, yeah, that's probably better. And if she sees it on 3 consecutive days, then she's a Zava Gedola, that's a major Zava, a big Zava. And then after
Zava
that...
with a capital Z.
Yeah, capital Z, Zava, capital, yeah. Anyways, and then after that, that's when you kind of have and she has the purification process that's more familiar to people who keep Niddah today, which is 7 clean days, and then
following the cessation, she determines, she verifies that she stopped bleeding, and then she counts 7 blood-free days, and then she goes to the mikveh. And so there's a shift that the Talmud tells us about in the name of Rabbi Zera, that B'not Yisrael, the Jewish women, decided that the reason is not mentioned explicitly in the Gemara, that they would treat all vaginal bleeding as though it were this more stringent Zava status of the Torah.
I was at a meal recently, and there was like mustard on the table, and someone was like, "Does mustard appear in the Talmud?" And I was like, "Abundantly, yes." The Talmud's language is tibat dam kechardal. Even an amount of blood like a mustard seed, they would take it to be a sign that they are a major Zava.
They'd wait till the bleeding, till the flow stops, verify the flow has stopped through an internal examination, then count 7 blood-free days with additional examination, then go to the mikveh. Just we should clarify, this mustard seed, that was only a flow of a mustard seed, not a stain. Not a stain. Stain of mustard seed would not be a problem. We should just sort of...
Yes. Right. So that, just from what you're hearing, if you're not familiar with Hilchot Niddah at all, we're throwing around like a lot of terms, and you can come to the class that I'm teaching in, a few weeks, about things you didn't learn in day school and should have, and we'll do kind of a major overview of even what this whole process looks like for people who don't themselves observe it, or don't yet observe it, or are men, or whatever, and we'll at least get to some of the basics of this, because it's actually, it's really a truly kind of amazing thing that there's this very complex area of halacha that we're sort of like, oh yes, in the month before your marriage, like you will learn this and master it and then observe it forever, which is crazy. But when you learn it in the Gemara, it's like, because there's this added purity, impurity valence, which we don't really bring to any other area of our lives. Like, that's part of what adds to the complexity of the whole system. There have been some other exciting pieces of kind of practical Niddah halacha that have appeared in the daf recently. So not just the coming together of Niddah and Ziva, which in and of itself is kind of a very interesting historical phenomenon. The scholar, by the way, who works on that is named Professor Charlotte von Robert. She's a professor at Stanford, and if you're interested in like the historical milieu in which that would have made a lot of sense, you can check out her work on
Niddah. Also Shai Secunda, who is actually, I think his book is being published like any minute maybe by the time this is about Hilchot Niddah in the context of
the Sasanian Empire and Persia and Zoroastrianism,
who had very, very strict and extensive Niddah regulations.
And we actually, what's amazing about the Talmud Bavli is that the rabbis get questions from this Persian queen named Ifro Hormuz, who kind of tests them and decides that, like, oh yes, they really know what they're talking about. There's one time where she sends them like a thing with louse blood on it, and a rabbi sends her back a louse comb. She's like, wow. So there's, Masachet Niddah in general is full of these kind of amazing stories about women and Gentile women also who are coming to the rabbis with their questions.
Just tells it's really like different context for observing these laws in a culture where everyone observed similar rules that were even stricter than ours in many ways. And we think of this, it's very countercultural for us and in many ways, and really distinctively Jewish and distinctively like the most obscure area of Jewish observance for even amongst Jews. Like it's pretty.
I do have a Muslim friend. Observant Muslims have some version of this.
Interesting.
And before I got married, she was like, IUD, strongly recommended.
Because it stops menstruation for the okay. That's funny. For when it works but that's for some it causes
Right,
long-term spotting, which would be a disaster.
Right. Well, that's why we avoid copper IUDs in general. Obviously, consult your physician.
I think Professor Sekunda's research has, just to circle back to Rabbi Zera's statement that the Jewish women were strict on themselves, that makes more sense in a context where, like, all the women and men, everyone was observing this in a very, very strict way, that you would feel like unhygienic or religiously
not
serious. Yeah, if you're not being super, super careful. And so in that context, it does make sense that Jewish women would just let's play it safe and let's treat all vaginal bleeding as though it were the Torah's more severe case of Zava, and that way we don't have to worry and it's less risky, and we're competing in piety and hygiene, etc., with our Zoroastrian neighbors.
And that's not the only place where observance of Jewish law gets influenced by the cultural milieu, right? So we talked about this with hair covering, for example, that in a time and place where nobody goes outside without their heads covered, men or women, then this whole business of do I have to wear my kippah outside? Do I not? What do I cover my hair just for davening? Do I cover my hair always? How much hair? Where? You don't have such an interesting halachic literature about this stuff until relatively in the scheme of Jews keeping Torah and mitzvot recently, because everyone did it. Because if you don't wash your hair that often, then you don't want to keep it uncovered because it'll get really schmutzy or whatever. And that was just the norm. And so it affects the way Jews live halacha and feel about halacha and all of that. And today, when it's kind of the opposite, then you have to decide I'm going to be countercultural. Right.
I think the mitzvot can say the same, but you assign them. Some of them are very countercultural, and some of them are very non-categorical, pro-culture, whatever.
Right.
Consistent with this surrounding culture, and the collection of mitzvot in each category may shift back and forth over time. Let's circle back to chatzitza that you just were about to mention.
Oh, right. Yeah. So in this last chapter of Niddah, where we've been finding all of this super relevant stuff finally, as opposed to I was squishing grapes in the vineyard, and I'm wondering now whether I need to burn the grapes. A little bit less relevant, though. I guess if that happens, talk to us. So, anyways, now we've gotten to this more kind of relevant material. There's been all sorts of things. So we have two major concepts in terms of preparation for mikvah. So they sound very similar, but they're different, called chafifa and chatzitza. So we'll start with chatzitza. Chatzitza are the things that come between your body and the mikvah water. So we have this very beautiful idea that there shouldn't be anything that comes in between your body and the mikvah water, and your whole body needs to be under the water all at one time. We bring tours to the mikvah sometime of I don't know, Hebrew school kids or whatever, and they're always it's not a very big swimming pool, and I'm yes, but it's a very big bathtub.
So let's go through the rules for what is a chatzitza. The Doraita, the Torah level chatzitza that would invalidate an immersion, is if most of the body is covered by something that the person is makbid about, meaning the person is
cares about it.
Yes, even particular about, right? Meaning I don't want to have most of my body covered with mud, okay? And that I've dried mud on my body, that would be invalidated immersion midoraita from a Torah level.
Mm-hmm. Well, importantly, you don't get to decide what you care about and what you don't care about. That is not a personal decision. And that's what makes these rules a little bit complicated, and why if there's something that needs to be on your body when you're going to the mikvah, you should probably ask a question about it. Is that it's not I get to say to myself, well, I'm just coming from the Dead Sea and my whole body is covered in mud, but I love having the mud on me, so it's totally fine. Yeah. That it's not about you. It's about people in the world, kind of broadly speaking.
So let's just move on. The next level would be something which you don't want but covers a minority of your body. That's Rabbanit, and that's rabbinic restriction. Mm-hmm. And then the time
or the opposite. It covers the majority of your body, but you do want it, and most people would want it. That's also a rabbinic
correct
level.
Right. And then the third level, which the Talmud explicitly says is not a problem, is something that covers a minority of your body and you want it there. And here it gets a little tricky because there is especially in Ashkenaz, a strong tradition to even remove those types of chatzitzot that cover a minority of your body with something that you want. So
a simple example of that would be nail polish.
Right, covers a minority of your body and you want it there. Let's say it's a brand new, you got to right before your wedding, you get your nails done really fancy, and then you go to the mikveh that day, right from the manicurist, so they're perfect, pristine, you want them there, and it's a minority of your body, so there's a strong Ashkenazi practice not to do it that way, and some mikveh will enforce that, but actually, it's explicit in the Talmud. That is not a problem. That doesn't invalidate the immersion, not in a Torah level, not in a rabbinic level. That's totally a valid immersion. So some tricky cases would be, I guess, as you just alluded.
A lot of medical cases are tricky, meaning like stitches are tricky.
Because you want them there, and they need to stay, let's say...
and anyone in your situation, meaning like I, who don't need stitches right now, do not want stitches in my hand, let's say. But anyone in your situation who yesterday sliced your hand open with a knife would want stitches.
Right. The Talmud's example is like, I think, women who work in the printing industry, right, with lots of ink. Like, for them, it's a mark of pride to have
inky
hands, right? Yeah, exactly.
And that's what makes it complicated, right?
It's a whole class, but it's not me as an individual.
Right.
I like being dirty, whatever, but no, it's not that. It's about a whole category that can be defined of women who work in the printing business who, for them, it's like a mark of pride to have inky hands, and or women with stitches who want their stitches there, or
there's also like dental appliances that are like permanent. So like, at what point does something become part of your body? That's also like an interesting question that. Because, right, like, stitches, well, like, okay, well, how long are they going to be on for, right? It's actually, like, a quite complicated area of halacha. But let's say you have a permanent retainer. That's, like, a very common thing, right? So you have a permanent retainer that's going to be on your body from now until, meaning you don't want it to ever fall off. So that's, like, a straightforward example of something that becomes, like, basically integrated into your body. The same way that if you, God forbid, you broke your arm and you had a steel plate put in, no one would tell you, like, yes, you have to take the steel plate out to go to the mikvah. Like, my favorite example, by the way, just while we're talking about chatzitzas, there's a discussion in the Gemara about a woman who is converting while pregnant. Does the fetus then need a new conversion when it comes out? And I believe that, I don't know what we do practically, but I believe the Talmud then says the fetus is fine because it's although it
has a chatzitza of the uterus.
Of like the mom, it wants it to be there. Anyone in the fetus's situation would want to be still in the uterus, and therefore it has like successfully immersed.
Okay, so good nafkamina test case would be, what about a full-term fetus?
Where the mom's like, get it out, but the fetus still wants to be there.
I think we generally frown upon conversion, during active labor, but that would be a test case to that theory.
A test case for mikvah hygiene also, yeah.
We don't do that.
There's like water births are all the rage these days.
It's very different.
Anyways, so chatzitza, they're some of the most kind of pressing questions because, and you get really, just to throw out some other cases.
Woman forgets to remove her contact lenses before going to the mikveh. That's like, hey, that's right.
There's some kinds of birth control that you take in and out. If you leave that in, or like, again, back to the medical stuff. But let's say you're, God forbid, having chemo and you have ports in. That's another one of these like challenging situations. But
casts also could be
casts, yeah. Though nowadays waterproof casts, that's like a new thing that you
just go in with it. Then just go
right, and usually water gets in, but then you kind of it gets yucky underneath. So you have to figure out how to dry that out after you go to the mikvah. All sorts of medical things. Sometimes you even have like an interesting question that people are divided over is what's it called when your hair is like not just in dreadlocks, because that you part of chafifa, which is the other word I introduced before and never got around to explaining, which is preparing for the mikvah such that you will have no chatzitzas. So that's a requirement to wash your hair or to shower or to check your whole body. It's a little complicated what the precise requirement of chafifa is. But so let's say you have dreadlocks, so you want them there, but they cover all of your hair. Possibly hair is, by the way, categorized like separately from the rest of your body in terms of these halachot. And you can't, and so one of the things you
can't be combed out.
It can't be combed out, right? Exactly, it can't be combed out, and it's literally knots. So then, what is the status of dreadlocks when it's like knots that you want there? But usually, even people like me, meaning women with curly hair, surprise, I have curly hair, are nowadays the thing, you like don't brush your hair when you have curly hair. You like wash your hair, you condition it. You like, I only brush my hair to go to the mikvah, and the reason is because we're really strict. Knots in hair and the Gemara says, oh, a knot with one hair versus a knot with like two hairs, but tachlis, knots in your hair, because you never inspect your knots that closely, are one of the things that you need to get out before getting into mikvah, so that the mikvah water can get to every piece of every hair. And so when you have dreadlocks and your hair is permanently and purposefully in knots, that's like another really complicated application of these halachot. And in general, like, we try not to tell people, like, in your life you cannot because then you won't be able to go to the mikvah. But dreadlocks are a challenging test case for that, I would say. So anyways, it's been really fun to kind of finally get to the practical pieces of Hilchot Niddah found in Masachet Niddah. And again, on Sunday, we're gathering to start the next Masachet, which is Brachot, which is full of practical things, and hopefully in the future podcasts,
especially the first half.
Yes. Well, even the last half gets to Birkot Hanenin, to food brachot. So that, I mean, that's pretty relevant, especially if you love caper bushes.
Like the dream section might be less.
The dream section, yes, and the ghost section in the third parak, that's good stuff too.
It's a great mistake. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's all fun.
Brachot's amazing. It's strongly recommended. It's the first thing I ever learned in Daf Yomi, and not with the cycle. So join us Sunday morning, even if you're, just for one day you want to be holding in Daf Yomi. Come on Sunday, you'll be up to date. Come on Sunday, but please do RSVP so we know to get enough food for everyone who plans to come. That can be found on the Anshe Shalom website. And if you want to join me in a siyum, in a completion celebration, along with 3 other members of our shul in Masachet Niddah, that will be at Sudah Shlishit this Shabbat, which we're very excited about. So come join us for that too. So we're here with our very own Gabbai, Dr. Josh Ehrlich. Wanted to welcome you to Shlunsky Studios.
Thank you very much.
So what is being a Gabbai like at Anshe Shalom?
Being a Gabbai at Anshe Shalom is very rewarding. I've enjoyed my time.
It's been a long time already, right?
I honestly can't remember when I started officially. I've been coming to shul for quite a while. I've been coming ever since Sarah moved into the neighborhood, on and off while we were engaged, and then when we first married, then I came regularly. But I really became Gabbai, I think, just through the process of coming to daily minyan and coming on a regular basis. The more you show up, the more responsibility you get. So I've been coming a lot. So.
And what are some of your Gabbai? What are the highlights? What are the lowlights? What are the pet peeves?
The big highlight is being forced to introduce myself to everyone in shul that I see. And
do you tell them nice teeth?
Oh, of course. I that's the first thing I notice. Yeah. So I do enjoy meeting new people, being forced to meet new people, I should say, because I'm pretty much an introvert. And I think if it weren't for this position, I would not meet as many people as I do now. So I'm thankful for that. And I enjoy being a part of the shul, or I should say being a part of the service. I like participating in whatever I can do. That's one thing that I always tell people is you do what you can, and you should do what you can, because that's a big part in coming to shul is being an active participant.
So when people say, no, I don't want to cover,
that's fine. Well, I don't want to impose on anyone, because I never know what the reason why. Maybe they really physically can't. Maybe they intellectually can't. Maybe they're just not in the right frame of mind. So no big deal, no problem. Thanks for coming, and hope you enjoy your time.
Do you find days where the Gabbaut is tough? Like this past Shabbos, we took out 3 Sifrei Torah or Simchat Torah or like the high holidays. Do you find that like fun and exhilarating or exhausting?
No, it's never exhausting. I think I mentally prepare, and it's almost like people that are into sports, they kind of psych themselves up. I got myself all ready. I had a big cup of coffee in the morning. I got pumped up, and it kind of need to know what things are going, and I try to think like a chess game, like what's the next step, what do we need to do to keep things moving. And it helps when the rabbi hands me the luach and says, did you remember to do this? I'm like, yes, I did.
Yeah.
So I'm all ready.
That's fantastic. And one of my favorite things, I remember visiting Anshe Shalom, like before I ever even considered working here, and noticing Noah's involvement in like setting up.
Yeah. No, that's another big reason why I do what I do is my kids, I think, are a big participant, and they enjoy participating and helping out. And I think they take pride in the fact that they know what should be done next and identifying what parts of the service we do, what we don't do, what they should look out for. So I do want to set a good example for them. And that's another reason why I do what I do.
Amazing. So let's talk a little bit about your life outside of the Gabbanit.
Yeah.
So I made a joke about teeth before.
Yeah.
That's because you're a dentist.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And is your practice in the neighborhood?
Yeah. I opened my office in 2008 on Sheffield. It's south of Belmont. It's in the neighborhood. I've always wanted to work and live in the same area relatively. I had dreams of just being able to walk to work, and I can, thankfully. Being the neighborhood dentist, being able to come in when I need to, and have it be convenient for work and life balance. So that's really a big part of why I'm a dentist too, is because I realized that it was besides just being able to make a living, it's a good lifestyle. I can take off when I need to. I can set the hours the way I need to for work and life and religious responsibilities. So it's a good thing. It's all good.
And I know your family feels like Lakeview is a kind of forever home for you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Do you want to talk about how you all came to that decision?
I think it was the shul, honestly. That's always been a big topic of conversation with when we were considering, where to buy a house, what's affordable, what's not affordable, schools, way of life, ability to live in a certain area. And the Jewish life is a very big part of our life. So when we were considering what's available to us, I think Anshe Shalom was the number one pull for us. Not so much jobs, because really I could have worked anywhere. I could have opened my office anywhere. Sarah could have found a job anywhere. Mm-hmm. There are other day schools in the city, thankfully. But really it was the shul, and we feel strongly connected to the shul. So that's another reason why we do as much as we do.
Amazing. Normally we ask people, well, if someone wanted to find you on Shabbat morning, where would they find you? But I'll
probably find you.
Oh,
so. It's like a speeding trap. I've seen you before you see me.
So anyways, if you ever have a family simcha you want to celebrate, or your site to celebrate, Josh is the person to find if you were looking to get an aliyah or open the Aron.
Yeah, don't be shy. Don't be shy. I want people to come up and say, hey, can I do this? Can I do that? And I will say yes. Other people might have other issues, but I will say yes.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming in this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of The Straw Hat. Thank you, as always, to our producer, Haley Leventhal, for all of the hard work she puts into making this podcast happen. If you have positive feedback on the podcast, we'd love to hear that in person, by voice note, by email. You can give us great ratings on wherever you listen to podcasts. All of that would be very much appreciated. If you have negative feedback, you can send it, like Joseph, to Egypt for 20 years. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful day.